Rapa Nui rests quietly in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, distant enough that time itself seems to loosen its grip. The island does not rush, the wind does not rush, and even daylight appears to follow a patient, negotiated schedule. Morning arrives when it is ready, evening follows without urgency, and listeners are gently invited to slow down and stay. The ocean surrounds the island in wide, patient arcs, repeating motions it has practiced for longer than memory needs to explain. Waves arrive, complete their work, and leave without commentary or complaint. Nothing asks for attention here, and nothing demands speed. Slowness is not decoration or mood. It is a practical agreement between land, water, sky, and the people who learned to live among them. Across this calm landscape, stone figures wait without tension. Some Moai rise clearly above the ground, while others appear only from the shoulders up, as though the earth itself has slowly pulled a blanket around them over centuries. They are often called head statues, yet they are complete forms, their bodies simply hidden by soil, gravity, and time doing its long, quiet work. The statues do not feel mysterious or dramatic. They feel steady, like something made carefully and then trusted to remain. Moai are not puzzles meant to keep anyone awake at night. They resemble the results of repeated effort, performed patiently day after day, season after season. They are like nets woven strand by strand, crops tended field by field, roofs repaired after many visits from the wind. The difference is not intention, only scale. Here the material is stone and the work asks for cooperation rather than force. What emerges is not urgency but rhythm, shared across an entire community, moving together slowly enough to last. This rhythm does not require explanation, instruction, or command because it grows naturally wherever people listen to one another and adjust their movements without hurry. In such conditions, even heavy stone becomes manageable, responding to timing instead of force, balance instead of struggle, and shared patience instead of strain. The Moai belong to this kind of world, one where effort is measured calmly, progress arrives quietly, and endurance is built through repetition rather than urgency. It is a beginning shaped for listening, breathing, and settling in, preparing the mind to follow stone footsteps that move slowly enough for rest to arrive naturally without effort added. Rano Raraku, where stone ideas began. Rano Raraku rests quietly within the island, a broad volcanic crater whose sloping interior holds the earliest intentions of the Moai. This is not a place of finished monuments or ceremonial display, but of beginnings. The stone here is volcanic tuff, pale and fine-grained, shaped by ancient eruptions and long exposure to wind and rain. It is soft enough to accept a chisel, yet strong enough to hold form once released. In this balance between yielding and endurance, the Moai first took shape, emerging slowly from the hillside as ideas translated into matter. Across the inner slopes of the crater, figures appear at every stage of becoming. Some Moai remain firmly attached to the bedrock, their forms still joined to the mountain that holds them. Others lie nearby, separated but unfinished, resting on the ground as though paused between thoughts. There is no single moment of abandonment here, no sign of sudden interruption. Instead, the quarry feels like a place where time simply continued forward, leaving certain gestures incomplete as new ones began elsewhere. Together, these figures create the impression of an extended conversation between people and stone, one that unfolded over generations rather than years. The process of carving followed a steady and repeatable routine. Artisans began by selecting a section of the crater wall where the stone was clean, consistent, and free from fractures. Onto this surface, the outline of a figure was drawn directly, marking the proportions and posture that would guide the work. From there, stone was removed gradually, always from the front, shaping the face, torso, and arms, while the back remained attached to the rock. This method allowed the statue to remain supported throughout most of its creation, reducing the risk of breakage and allowing the form to emerge slowly, under constant observation. Each strike of the tool followed the one before it, not with force, but with familiarity. The sound of stone being shaped would have been steady and repetitive, echoing lightly across the crater. Dust fell and settled without disturbance, gathering at the base of the carving. Progress was not measured in days or milestones, but in continuity. The work advanced because it returned again and again to the same gestures, guided by hands that understood the stone through experience rather than instruction. Once the front of a moai was complete, the statue was carefully separated from the rock behind it. This moment did not mark completion, but transition. The figure was now free from the mountain, yet not fully part of the world beyond the quarry. The back was finished only after the statue was lowered and repositioned, allowing artisans to complete the final surfaces. Even then, the moai remained within Rano Raraku, resting among others like it, waiting for the next stage of its journey. There is no evidence that this work was rushed. The quarry shows no signs of urgency or improvisation. Instead, everything about the space suggests patience. Tools were used until they wore down and then replaced. Figures were left unfinished without being discarded. The rhythm of work appears to have aligned with seasons, availability, and shared agreement rather than strict schedules. Time was not an obstacle to overcome, but an element woven directly into the process. Rano Raraku itself supported this approach. The crater walls offered shelter from wind, while the interior held a sense of enclosure that separated the work from the rest of the island. Within this space, focus could remain on the stone in front of the carver, not on distant demands or external pressures. The landscape encouraged repetition, observation, and adjustment. Each figure benefited from the accumulated knowledge of those carved before it, while still remaining distinct in detail and proportion. The unfinished moai are among the most revealing features of the quarry. Their presence suggests not failure, but continuity. Some may have been left due to changes in leadership or shifting priorities. Others may have remained because new projects took precedence. None show signs of being abandoned in haste. Instead, they appear calmly set aside, as though their makers expected that time would eventually return to them, or that their partial existence was acceptable within a larger cycle of creation. This acceptance of incompletion reflects a broader understanding of work as process rather than product. The moai were not created to be hurried into place, but to be shaped through sustained attention. The quarry therefore functions as both workshop and archive, preserving not only finished intentions, but also the pauses, revisions, and redirections that accompanied them. It is a record of thought made visible through stone. Standing within Rano Raraku, one does not feel the presence of disruption. There is no sense of catastrophe frozen in place. Instead, the space communicates calm continuity. The stone holds the memory of touch, of tools lifted and set down, of days that followed one another without urgency. The Moai remain here not as evidence of something lost, but as traces of a methodical and patient relationship between people and material. In this way, Rano Raraku marks the true beginning of the Moai story, not as a dramatic origin point, but as a quiet foundation where ideas took form slowly, guided by repetition, observation, and time. The statues began here not with force or command, but with consistency. And even in their unfinished state, they continue to speak of a culture that understood creation as something that unfolds gently, leaving room for both completion and pause within the long movement of time. In the context of sleep storytelling, Rano Raraku becomes a place where intention slows into permanence. Stone responds to patience. People respond to rhythm. Progress arrives quietly, measured in consistency rather than speed. Before any Moai traveled across the island, before ropes were tied or balance tested, there was this beginning. Stone met restraint. Hands learned repetition. Time expanded gently. Rano Raraku held these moments without tension, preserving a way of working defined by calm endurance, steady motion, and the quiet confidence that nothing needed to hurry. Patience as a technology. It is often tempting when standing before large stone figures to imagine hidden machines, forgotten tools, or lost technologies that made such work possible. The scale alone invites speculation. How else, one might wonder, could stone be shaped with such consistency and presence? Yet at Rano Raraku, the explanation rests not in mystery, but in something quieter and far more accessible: patience. The quarry does not suggest speed, innovation in the modern sense, or sudden leaps of technique. Instead, it reveals a way of working where time itself functioned as a primary tool, applied deliberately and without urgency. Volcanic tuff, the material of the Moai, plays an important role in this understanding. Compared to harder stones, such as basalt or granite, tuff is relatively soft and responsive. It accepts shaping through repeated contact rather than force. A blow does not need to be heavy to be effective. It needs to be accurate and consistent. This quality allowed artisans to work slowly, removing small amounts of stone over extended periods without damaging the integrity of the form. The material rewarded attention, not aggression, and encouraged a rhythm that aligned naturally with long spans of time. Skill in this environment did not arrive suddenly. It accumulated gradually, passed from one set of hands to another through observation and shared practice. Techniques were not written or formalized. They lived within bodies, within gestures repeated until they became instinctive. A younger carver learned by watching an older one, by mimicking movements, by feeling the resistance of the stone and adjusting accordingly. Knowledge moved quietly across generations, not as innovation, but as continuity. This method of transmission meant that improvement did not depend on invention, but refinement. Each generation worked slightly more efficiently, not because they discovered something new, but because they understood the material more deeply. They learned where the stone fractured, how moisture affected its surface, how light revealed imperfections. Over time, this familiarity became a form of technology in itself, one rooted in long-term engagement, rather than mechanical advantage. Patience shaped not only how the Moai were carved, but how the entire process was organized. There is no evidence of strict deadlines or centralized production schedules. A A moai did not need to be finished within a specific season or generation. It only needed to be completed when it was ready. This flexibility allowed work to pause and resume without penalty. If conditions changed, if labor was redirected, the stone could wait. The quarry holds many examples of figures left unfinished, not because of failure, but because time allowed for postponement without loss. In this way, patience functioned as a stabilizing force. It reduced the pressure that often leads to error. Carvers did not need to rush to meet expectations imposed by scarcity or urgency. The stone would remain, and so would the people working it. This long view supported accuracy. A mistake made in haste could compromise an entire figure, but patience minimized such risks. The work advanced through careful repetition, allowing small corrections at every stage. Treating time as an available resource also influenced social organization. Labor could be distributed across years and shared among many individuals without disruption. One person might begin shaping a moai, another continue it, and a third complete it. The identity of the maker mattered less than the integrity of the outcome. This collective authorship further reduced pressure on any single individual and reinforced a culture of shared responsibility. The absence of urgency does not imply inefficiency. On the contrary, the consistency observed at Rano Raraku suggests a highly effective system. Figures follow recognizable proportions. Techniques remain stable across the quarry. Such uniformity would be difficult to maintain without a reliable method. That method was not mechanical replication but sustained attention over time. Patience ensured that deviations were noticed early and corrected gradually. Once a moai was finished, however, patience alone was no longer sufficient. The statue now needed to move. This transition marked a shift from shaping to transport, from stillness to motion. Yet even here, the same philosophy applied. Movement was not rushed. Preparation mattered as much as action. The decision to relocate a moai likely followed careful consideration of timing, manpower, and conditions. Just as carving unfolded slowly, so too did the process of transport. The requirement to move the moai reinforces the idea that patience was integrated into every phase of their creation. Transport methods, whatever their exact form, depended on coordination rather than speed. People had to work together, adjust to terrain, and respond to setbacks without panic. A hurried approach would have increased the risk of damage or failure. Patience allowed for correction, rest, and reassessment. Understanding patience as a technology reframes how achievement is measured. Instead of asking how quickly something was accomplished, the focus shifts to how sustainably it was maintained. The moai represent not a burst of capability, but a long-standing equilibrium between people, material, and time. This equilibrium required discipline, not acceleration. It depended on restraint as much as effort. In modern thinking, technology is often associated with tools that reduce time. At Rano Raraku, technology extended time. It allowed work to unfold across generations without losing coherence. This approach challenges assumptions about progress and efficiency. It suggests that complexity does not always require speed, and that durability can emerge from slowness. The quarry itself reflects this philosophy. It does not overwhelm with spectacle. It invites observation. The unfinished figures do not demand explanation. They simply exist, comfortable in their partial state. Their presence confirms that incompletion was not a problem to solve, but a condition to accept. The culture that produced them did not equate value with immediacy. By treating patience as a tool, the people of Rano Raraku created space for careful work, shared knowledge, and adaptability. Their achievements were not the result of hidden mechanisms or lost expertise, but of a system that trusted time to do part of the work. Stone was shaped slowly, and meaning accumulated just as gradually. In the end, the Moai stand not as evidence of extraordinary force, but of sustained attention. They remind us that time, when respected and integrated into process, becomes an active participant. At Rano Raraku, patience was not passive waiting. It was applied deliberately, refined through practice, and relied upon as consistently as any physical tool. And through it, stone was not conquered but persuaded, one careful moment at a time. Leaving the quarry, the long way out. Once a Moai was released from the slopes of Rano Raraku, its existence entered a different phase, one defined not by shaping but by movement. The quarry was a place of beginnings, where form emerged slowly from volcanic stone, but it was never intended to be the statue's final home. Meaning waited elsewhere, at the Ahu, ceremonial platforms placed carefully around the island, most often near the coast, woven into the daily visual and social rhythm of the community. Between the quarry and these platforms stretched a long, patient journey that relied less on spectacle than on familiarity, balance, and time. From a distance, the island may appear small, but the paths between Rano Raraku and the Ahu were not insignificant. They crossed uneven ground, gentle slopes, narrow ridges, and open plains shaped by wind and weather. Transporting a Moai along these routes was not a singular event, but a sustained process, one that unfolded over days or longer, guided by people who understood the land as well as they understood the stone. The journey did not demand haste. It required steadiness. The Moai that remain along these ancient routes are often misunderstood. To modernize, they can look like abandoned projects, evidence of failure or sudden collapse. Yet their positions suggest something else entirely. Many stand upright or lean at controlled angles, stabilized rather than discarded. Their placement implies interruption, not chaos. Like commas within a long sentence, they mark pauses in a process that allowed for rest, reassessment, or changing circumstances. These statues indicate the transport was flexible and responsive, not rigidly goal-driven. Movement likely began in the early morning hours, when light was soft and temperatures cooler. This was a practical choice rather than a symbolic one. Cooler air reduced strain, and early daylight provided clarity without glare. Ropes were prepared, tools gathered, and groups assembled whose members already understood their tasks. Roles did not need to be explained repeatedly. Knowledge had been passed quietly from one generation to the next, reinforced through observation and participation rather than instruction alone. There was no need for raised voices. Large tasks often benefit from quiet coordination, and this work was no exception. The people involved communicated through rhythm and attention. A slight shift in posture, a change in rope tension, or a brief pause conveyed more than words. Each participant watched both the stone and the others, adjusting continuously. The Moai advanced not through brute force, but through careful guidance, leaning forward incrementally, corrected gently, then moved again. The nature of volcanic tuff supported this method. The stone was workable but not indestructible. Sudden force risked cracking or surface damage, undoing months or years of careful carving. Patience protected the work already completed. Movement became an extension of carving itself, another phase requiring sensitivity rather than urgency. Progress was measured not in distance covered, but in control maintained. Paths across the island were not invented solely for statues. They followed routes already embedded in daily life, shaped by repeated travel, farming, and movement between settlements. This integration mattered. It meant the Moai moved through spaces that were already understood, where the ground's behavior in rain or dryness was known, where footing could be anticipated. Transport adapted to the island rather than reshaping it. Where slopes steepened or ground narrowed, movement slowed. Where the land opened, the pace eased forward. Weather also played a role. Wind, rain, and ground conditions influenced decisions constantly. A day might begin with intention, then pause if conditions shifted. Such pauses were not failures. They were part of the method. The presence of roadside moai supports this interpretation. Some statues may have rested for extended periods, waiting for conditions to improve or for labor to be available again. The process allowed for interruption without loss. The central challenge of transport was not strength, but duration. Moving a moai required sustained cooperation over time. This made transport a communal act that reinforced social bonds. Each participant relied on others to maintain balance, attention, and consistency. Trust mattered more than speed. A rushed movement could undo weeks of progress. A steady one, even if slow, preserved both the statue and the people guiding it. This duration also shaped the social experience of transport. The work was embedded in routine rather than treated as an extraordinary event. People returned to it day after day, integrating it into broader cycles of labor, food preparation, and rest. The moai did not dominate life, it accompanied it. In this way, movement became familiar rather than monumental. Arrival at an ahu was not an abrupt conclusion. Placement required its own patience. The platform had been prepared carefully, aligned with landscape, settlement, and sightlines that mattered to the community. The moai was raised and positioned with attention to orientation and balance. This final phase demanded as much care as any earlier step. The statue was not simply placed, it was settled, becoming part of a living environment rather than a distant object. Once positioned, the moai faced inland toward the people rather than outward toward the sea. This orientation reinforces the idea that the statues were meant to participate in daily life. They were not remote markers of power, but steady presences within the community's visual field. Their journey from quarry to platform mirrored this intention, moving gradually from the place of creation to the place of relationship. What remains today are traces of this long process, paths worn subtly into the land, statues resting mid-journey, platforms aligned with care. Together they form a map of method rather than mystery. They suggest a culture that valued continuity over spectacle, attention over force. Completion was important, but so was the way completion was reached. Leaving the quarry was not an escape from labor, but its continuation. The moai moved slowly because slowness was essential to success. Time was not an obstacle to overcome, but a resource to use. By allowing movement to unfold patiently, the people of Rapa Nui ensured that stone traveled across the island without losing its form or meaning. In this long way out, the moai's journey reflects a broader understanding of work itself. Large undertakings do not require constant urgency. They require consistency, shared knowledge, and the willingness to pause. The statues that still stand and those that rest along the paths bear quiet witness to this approach. The journey from Rano Raraku to the Ahu was not a test of strength alone. It was a demonstration of balance between people and stone, effort and restraint, intention and patience. And in that balance, the Moai completed their transformation, not in a single dramatic moment, but through a long sequence of careful, deliberate steps that honored both the material and the time it required. Methods considered lying down and rolling along. For many years, one of the earliest and most widely accepted explanations for how the Moai were transported across Rapa Nui focused on a simple and familiar idea, that the statues were moved while lying down, pulled horizontally across the land using wooden sleds, rollers, or a combination of both. This image feels intuitive. When faced with a heavy object, humans across cultures have often chosen to lower it, distribute its weight, and slide or roll it forward. The method echoes everyday problem solving, like shifting a large piece of furniture across a floor or dragging a fallen tree along the ground. In this sense, the proposal does not rely on mystery or advanced engineering, only on practical logic. From an experimental standpoint, this approach appears workable. Large stones elsewhere in the world have been moved in similar ways, using teams of people, ropes, and wooden supports. Archaeological reconstructions demonstrate that even very heavy loads can be shifted when weight is spread evenly and friction is reduced. Rolling logs placed beneath an object can transform dragging into controlled motion. Sleds, when combined with lubrication or careful timing, can slide across uneven terrain. These methods align with what is known about human ingenuity in pre-industrial societies, where simple tools were often combined with patience and cooperation. Because of this, the idea of horizontal transport gained traction early in Moai research. It allowed scholars to explain movement without invoking unusual techniques or speculative technologies. It also matched early assumptions that the statues were treated primarily as heavy cargo rather than upright figures during transport. In diagrams and reconstructions, Moai were often shown lying face up or face down, secured to wooden frames, pulled by groups moving in unison. The simplicity of the image made it persuasive, especially to those encountering the mystery for the first time. However, when this idea is placed fully within the physical and ecological context of Rapa Nui, complications begin to surface. The island is not flat. Its surface is shaped by volcanic activity, erosion, and long exposure to wind and rain. Slopes rise and fall unpredictably. Ground conditions vary from compacted earth to loose rock. A method that works well on level ground does not automatically translate to such an environment. Dragging a long, heavy stone across changing inclines introduces challenges of control, braking, and stability that increase dramatically with distance. Another significant consideration is timber. The lying down method depends heavily on wood, either in the form of sleds, rollers, or both. Yet Rapa Nui's environmental history suggests that large quantities of suitable timber would not have been easy to maintain indefinitely. While the island was once more forested, its tree resources were finite and gradually diminished over centuries of use. Transporting dozens, possibly hundreds, of statues using wood-intensive techniques would have required constant replacement of materials. This does not make the method impossible, but it does raise questions about long-term efficiency. Rollers in particular require repeated repositioning. As a statue advances, the logs beneath it must be moved from back to front, again and again. This demands additional labor and coordination, as well as time. On uneven ground, rollers can slip, sink, or twist, increasing the risk of damage to the statue. A fallen moai could crack or chip, undoing years of careful carving. Given the value placed on precision and surface finish, any method that increased the chance of damage would have been approached cautiously. Sled-based transport reduces some of these risks but introduces others. Sleds concentrate weight along specific points of contact with the ground. On soft or uneven surfaces, this can lead to sinking or sudden jolts. Steering a sled downhill requires careful braking, while uphill movement demands sustained pulling force. Each change in slope alters the physics of the task, requiring constant adjustment. Over long distances, these small challenges accumulate, turning movement into an exhausting and potentially hazardous endeavor. None of these challenges automatically invalidate horizontal transport. Humans are adaptable, and many societies have solved similar problems under difficult conditions. What these complications suggest, however, is that the lying down method may not have been the only approach, nor necessarily the most efficient one available within the specific constraints of Rapa Nui. Efficiency, in this context, does not mean speed. It means minimizing risk, conserving resources, and maintaining consistency over repeated journeys. As research progressed, scholars began to reconsider earlier assumptions. Attention shifted toward methods that required less timber, adapted more naturally to uneven terrain, and allowed for finer control. The presence of upright roadside moai along ancient paths encouraged this reevaluation. If statues were always transported horizontally, their upright positions along routes would require additional explanation. While re-erection during transport is possible, it adds further steps to an already complex process. Importantly, rethinking transport methods does not require rejecting earlier ideas outright. Archaeology rarely moves through sudden replacement of theories. Instead, it layers understanding, allowing multiple possibilities to coexist while evidence gradually clarifies which methods were most likely used in different contexts. Some moai may indeed have been transported lying down, especially smaller ones, or those moved over short distances. Others may have followed alternative paths, shaped by size, terrain, or available labor. In sleep version storytelling, there is no urgency to resolve this debate decisively. The goal is not to prove a single method superior, but to allow the range of human possibilities to rest quietly beside one another. One can imagine a moai lying carefully secured to a sled, inching forward across the land. Ropes taut, but voices calm. At the same time, one can imagine another statue upright, guided step by step through balance and rhythm. These images do not compete, they coexist. What matters more than the specific technique is the mindset behind it. All proposed methods share certain underlying qualities: patience, cooperation, and attentiveness to material limits. Whether pulled, rolled, or guided upright, the moai did not move quickly. They moved deliberately. Each decision was shaped by experience, observation, and respect for both stone and land. The absence of haste is the constant thread across all scenarios. By allowing multiple methods to remain plausible, we gain a richer picture of Rapa Nui society. Rather than imagining a single rigid system applied uniformly, we can envision a flexible culture capable of adapting techniques to circumstances. Knowledge would have evolved through trial, observation, and refinement. What worked in one region or generation may have been adjusted in another. This adaptability reflects not uncertainty, but resilience. Ultimately, the debate over horizontal transport highlights how easily modern expectations can shape interpretation. When we imagine ancient people solving problems, we often project our own habits onto them. Yet their solutions were shaped by environments, values, and temporal perspectives very different from ours. Time, for instance, was not compressed. A journey that took days or weeks was acceptable if it preserved balance and safety. The process mattered as much as the outcome. The lying down method with its sleds and rollers remains an important part of this conversation. It grounds the discussion in practical mechanics and reminds us that simple tools, combined with cooperation, can achieve remarkable results. At the same time, its limitations encourage openness to other possibilities. Archaeology, like storytelling, benefits from this openness. In the end, the transport of the Moai was not a single puzzle with a single answer. It was a series of lived practices refined over time, shaped by land, resources, and shared understanding. Allowing these methods to sit gently beside one another, without forcing resolution, brings us closer to the quiet intelligence that likely guided the people of Rapa Nui themselves. The walking stone. A softer explanation. In the early years of the 2010s, a different explanation for the movement of the Moai began to receive wider attention, not because it introduced something radically new, but because it reframed the problem in a gentler, more attentive way. Instead of imagining the statues as passive weights dragged across the land, this approach suggested that the Moai may have been moved upright, guided step by step through a controlled rocking motion that allowed them to walk across the island. The idea did not arrive with fanfare. It emerged quietly, shaped by experiments, observation, and a growing sensitivity to the relationship between stone, balance, and human coordination. In this method, the statue remains vertical throughout the journey. It leans slightly forward, its weight resting in a position that invites motion rather than resisting it. Ropes are attached to both sides of the Moai and sometimes to the rear for stability. Teams stand on either side holding the ropes with measured tension. Instead of pulling forward all at once, the groups alternate their effort. One side pulls gently, the other releases slightly, and then the motion reverses. With each shift, the statue pivots, lifting one edge of its base just enough to allow a small advance. The movement is incremental, subtle, and steady. What makes this method compelling is not spectacle, but restraint. There is no sudden lurch, no dramatic surge of force. The Moai moves only as much as it is allowed to move. Each step is the result of balance rather than strength. The people guiding it do not overpower the stone. They listen to it. They feel the tension through the ropes, adjust their timing, and respond to the statue's natural tendency to settle back into equilibrium. In this sense, the process resembles a conversation more than a command. Experimental reconstructions demonstrated that this technique could be effective even with large statues. When properly balanced, a Moai requires less raw force to move upright than to be dragged horizontally. The center of gravity plays a crucial role. Because the statues are wider at the base and often slightly forward-leaning, Their form naturally supports this rocking motion. What might appear unstable at first glance becomes surprisingly cooperative when guided with care. The stone does not resist movement, it accommodates it. This approach also aligns closely with the physical evidence found along ancient paths. Many roadside moai stand upright, partially buried, facing inward toward the island rather than outward toward the sea. Their positions suggest interruption rather than collapse. If statues were transported upright, then pauses along the route would not require re-erection. A moai could simply be set down and stabilized, waiting until conditions allowed the journey to continue. This interpretation removes the need for additional steps and reduces the risk of damage. Another advantage of the walking method lies in its reduced dependence on timber. While ropes are still required, the technique does not rely on sleds or rollers that must be replaced or repositioned repeatedly. Ropes can be made from local plant fibers and reused over long periods. This fits more comfortably within the environmental constraints of Rapa Nui, where large-scale timber use would have been increasingly difficult to sustain over generations. The walking method conserves resources by focusing on coordination rather than material abundance. Terrain also becomes less of an obstacle when statues move upright. Slopes, while still challenging, can be managed through careful adjustment of timing and rope tension. Instead of dragging a heavy load uphill or breaking a sled downhill, teams can slow or pause the rocking motion as needed. The statue responds immediately to changes in force, allowing for fine control. Uneven ground becomes something to negotiate rather than something to overcome. Perhaps the most striking aspect of this method is how it reframes the relationship between people and stone. The moai is no longer an inert object. It becomes an active participant in its own movement. The statue's shape, weight distribution, and base all contribute to the process. People do not impose motion upon it, they invite it. This shift in perspective resonates strongly with what is known about Rapa Nui culture, where stone figures were not merely objects but carriers of presence, ancestry, and meaning. From this viewpoint, moving a moai upright makes cultural sense as well as mechanical sense. Keeping the statue vertical preserves its identity throughout the journey. It remains a figure, not a block. It travels rather than being transported. The act of walking a moai from quarry to platform could have held symbolic significance, reinforcing the idea that the statue was coming into its role gradually, step by step, rather than being delivered as finished cargo. The rhythm of the walking method also deserves attention. Alternating pulls create a cadence that teams can follow together. Movement becomes synchronized, almost musical. The statue advances not because one side pulls harder, but because both sides pull at the right moment. Timing replaces force. This kind of coordination is well suited to communal labor, where shared rhythm strengthens cooperation and reduces fatigue. Over long distances, rhythm matters more than speed. In this sense, the walking stone method treats time as an ally rather than an obstacle. There is no need to rush. A moai does not need to arrive quickly. It needs to arrive intact and properly oriented. The slow, deliberate pace allows for rest, adjustment, and learning along the way. Knowledge accumulates with each journey passed from one group to the next. Mistakes are noticed early before they become failures. It is important to note that this explanation does not claim exclusivity. Like other proposed methods, it is best understood as part of a broader toolkit. Some statues may have been walked, others dragged, others moved, using combinations of techniques depending on size, distance, and available labor. What distinguishes the walking method is not that it replaces all others, but that it expands the range of what is considered possible. Modern experiments that demonstrated the walking technique were often conducted with relatively small teams, reinforcing the idea that massive labor forces were not strictly necessary. This challenges older assumptions that Moai transport required overwhelming numbers of people and vast resources. Instead, it suggests that skill, coordination, and familiarity with stone behavior could accomplish the task efficiently. In sleep version storytelling, this method feels particularly appropriate. There is no argument to win, no mystery to dramatize. The image of a stone figure moving slowly across the land, guided by gentle tension and careful timing, carries a natural calm. The process unfolds like a quiet ritual. Voices remain low, steps are measured. The land receives the movement without protest. Stone in this context appears to respond to rhythm. When pulled in haste, it resists. When guided patiently, it cooperates. This observation, while poetic, reflects a real mechanical truth. Controlled oscillation reduces friction and distributes force evenly, but it also hints at something deeper, a way of working that values harmony over domination. By imagining Moai walking, we are not attributing magic to stone. We are acknowledging the intelligence of form and the sophistication of human observation. Ancient builders did not need to overpower their materials, they needed to understand them. The walking stone explanation honors that understanding. Ultimately, this method invites a shift in how we think about ancient engineering. It moves the focus away from lost technologies and toward lived knowledge. It suggests that solutions emerged not from complexity, but from attentiveness, from watching how stone settles, from feeling how it responds to pressure, from allowing movement to happen at its own pace. In this way, the walking stone becomes more than a technique. It becomes a metaphor for how the Moai themselves came into being, slowly, deliberately, guided by patience rather than urgency. The statues did not rush into place. They arrived when ready, shaped by rhythm, balance, and the quiet cooperation between people, land, and stone. Why walking works: shape, balance, and gravity. Many Moai share a common feature that at first appears subtle, but over time reveals itself as essential. Their bases are shaped like a softened letter D. This rounded front and flatter back is not accidental decoration, nor is it a byproduct of careless carving. It is a form that interacts deliberately with gravity. Combined with the statue's slight forward lean, this base shape creates a condition where the Moai are naturally stable when standing upright, yet surprisingly responsive when gently rocked. Stability and movement coexist within the same design, not as opposites, but as partners. When a Moai stands still, its center of gravity settles comfortably within the footprint of its base. The weight presses downward in a way that resists toppling. But when force is applied carefully from the sides, the statue does not fight back aggressively. Instead, it allows a controlled shift. The rounded front edge becomes a pivot point, and the forward lean encourages motion in that direction. The statue does not fall, it transitions. This balance between resistance and permission is what makes walking possible. Recent studies and experimental reconstructions have explored this interaction in practical terms. Using replica statues carved to match the proportions and weight distribution of original Moai, researchers tested whether upright movement could be achieved reliably. The results were quiet rather than dramatic, but deeply reassuring. Replicas weighing several tons were moved hundreds of meters in under an hour by coordinated teams using ropes alone. No sleds, no rollers, no excessive force, just timing, balance, and patience. These numbers matter, but not because they are impressive. They matter because they remove the need for speculation rooted in exaggeration. They show that calm, methodical techniques are not only possible, but effective. The Moai do not require lost technologies or overwhelming labor. They require understanding. When the statue's shape is respected, gravity becomes a guide rather than an obstacle. The earth itself participates in the process, receiving each shift of weight and returning it gently. The forward lean of the Moai is particularly important. While it may seem counterintuitive to tilt a massive stone figure toward the direction of travel, this inclination reduces the amount of force needed to initiate movement. Gravity already wants the statue to move forward. The task of the people guiding it is not to drag it against its nature, but to regulate that desire. By alternating tension on the ropes, they prevent uncontrolled tipping while allowing incremental progress. Balance in this method is dynamic rather than fixed. The Moai is never completely still, even when paused. Its weight is always slightly engaged with motion, ready to respond. This requires attentiveness from the teams. Hands must remain alert. Feet adjust their stance constantly. The work is not exhausting, but it is absorbing. Everyone involved must feel the statue's rhythm and respond in kind. In storytelling terms, this is where the pace naturally slows. The focus shifts from explanation to sensation. Rope fibers tighten under steady hands. Palms adjust their grip, finding the balance between firmness and flexibility. The ground presses back through bare feet. Breathing aligns with motion. No one shouts. Instructions are unnecessary once the rhythm is established. The statue teaches the people how to move it. With each cycle, the Moai advances a small distance. Not inches wrested through struggle, but steps offered through cooperation. The movement is smooth enough that observers often describe it as walking, not metaphorically, but visually. The statue sways from side to side, its head tracing a gentle arc against the sky, its base lifting and settling in a pattern that feels almost deliberate. It is not fast. It is not slow. It is exactly as fast as balance allows. This rhythm reduces fatigue over long distances. Because no single pull carries the full burden of the statue's weight, strain is distributed evenly across the team. Muscles work, then rest, then work again. Over time, this pattern allows people to sustain effort without exhaustion. The statue moves farther not because people push harder, but because they move smarter. The D-shaped base plays a crucial role here. Its geometry prevents sudden shifts that could destabilize the statue. The rounded edge allows smooth pivoting, while the flatter rear provides a natural stopping point when motion pauses. This makes the Moai forgiving. Small errors in timing do not result in disaster. The statue settles back into balance, waiting patiently for the next coordinated pull. Terrain variation, often cited as a major obstacle to upright movement, becomes more manageable under this method. Slopes do not require dragging weight uphill. They require adjusting timing. On gentle inclines, gravity assists. On declines, the rhythm slows, and tension increases slightly to maintain control. Uneven ground is addressed step by step. The statue does not slide uncontrollably. It responds to the same principles everywhere: balance first, motion second. Importantly, this method aligns with archaeological observations. Many moai found along ancient paths remain upright, partially buried, facing inland. Their posture suggests they were never laid down. Instead, they appear to have been set aside intentionally, perhaps during pauses in transport. If statues were walked, stopping them upright would be the simplest option. There would be no need to lift them again later. They would simply wait. This waiting is a crucial concept. The walking method treats time as abundant. There is no urgency to complete the journey in a single effort. Weather, labor availability, and ritual timing could all influence progress. A statue might move for days, then rest for weeks. Its presence along the path would not indicate failure, only patience. The island landscape becomes dotted with moments rather than mistakes. Gravity, often imagined as the enemy of ancient builders, emerges here as an ally. Instead of lifting stone away from the earth, people work with the downward pull. Each shift of weight is small, controlled, and reversible. If something feels wrong, movement stops. The statue remains stable. This safety margin is essential when dealing with objects of such scale. The efficiency demonstrated in modern experiments reinforces this interpretation. Moving a multi-ton statue hundreds of meters in under an hour is not evidence of extraordinary strength. It is evidence of refined coordination. It shows that when the form of the object is understood, the problem simplifies. Complexity dissolves into rhythm. In sleep version storytelling, this is the heart of the explanation. There is no need to dramatize effort. The beauty lies in restraint. People and stone meet halfway. The work becomes almost meditative. Attention narrows. The outside world fades. Only motion remains. Stone responds not because it is commanded, but because it is allowed. Its mass becomes predictable. Its balance becomes familiar. Over time, those guiding it no longer think about technique. They feel it. The statue's sway signals when to pull. Its settling signals when to pause. The process becomes intuitive. This intuition is likely what ancient Rapa Nui builders relied on most. Techniques were not written down. They were embodied, passed through demonstration rather than instruction. A younger person would learn by standing on the rope, feeling the timing, matching breath to movement. Knowledge lived in muscles and memory, not diagrams. The walking method also preserves the integrity of the statue. Dragging risks abrasion, chipping, and fracture. Rolling requires constant adjustment and replacement of materials. Walking minimizes contact with the ground. The base touches only where intended. This reduces damage over long distances and preserves the statue's form. Ultimately, why walking works is not a single answer, but a convergence. Shape supports balance. Balance invites motion. Gravity provides momentum. Rhythm organizes effort. Time removes pressure. Together, these elements create a system that is quiet, efficient, and deeply human. There is no mystery hidden here, only attentiveness. The Moai were shaped not only to stand, but to move. Their form contains the solution to their journey. People did not force stone across the island, they accompanied it. In this telling, the walking stone is not a trick or a novelty. It is the natural result of listening closely to material, land, and gravity. It shows that ancient engineering was not about overcoming nature, but about aligning with it. And when alignment is achieved, even the heaviest stone learns to walk. A day of moving stone, rolls and quiet humor. A day of moving a moai begins without ceremony. There is no dramatic call to action, no sharp signal that divides rest from labor. Instead, the work emerges naturally from the morning, as if it were simply another task, folded into the rhythm of island life. The air is cool, the ground still holding traces of night moisture, and the statue waits where it stood the evening before, upright, patient, and unmoved by the passing hours. Around it, people gather gradually, each taking a familiar place without instruction. A typical transport team is not a single massive effort, but a collection of small, coordinated groups. On one side of the statue stands the left pulling team. On the other, the right pulling team mirrors them. Each group grips its rope with an understanding built from repetition rather than explanation. They know how much tension to apply, how quickly to respond, and how to sense when the statue is ready to move again. Between these two teams, slightly behind the moai, is another group whose role is less visible, but no less important. They monitor balance. This balance group watches the statue's posture closely. Their attention rests on subtle shifts, how the base settles after each movement, how the forward lean changes with terrain, how the ropes tighten or slacken. They adjust knots, redistribute tension, and quietly intervene if enthusiasm begins to outpace control. Their task is not to move the statue forward, but to ensure it does not move too far, too fast, or in the wrong direction. They are the keepers of restraint. No one runs during this process. Running introduces urgency, and urgency disrupts rhythm. The moai does not respond well to haste. Its weight demands consistency, not speed. Each step forward is earned through balance, not force. The teams understand this intuitively. Their feet remain planted, knees slightly bent, bodies aligned with the rope. Movement happens through coordinated pulls, not sudden lunges. The rhythm establishes itself quickly, a gentle sway to the left, a pause, a measured pull to the right, another pause. With each cycle, the statue advances a small distance, its head tracing a calm arc against the sky. The teams breathe together, their movements settling into a shared tempo that requires no counting aloud. Once found, the rhythm becomes self-sustaining. Within this discipline, there is room for light humor. Work that stretches across hours and days cannot remain silent without becoming heavy. Someone on the left team might quietly insist that their timing is better today, pulling just a fraction earlier than agreed. The right team, noticing this, might respond by exaggerating their own precision, waiting an extra heartbeat before pulling back. The statue, indifferent to these small human negotiations, responds only to balance. Nearby, someone often assumes an unofficial role, not assigned but gradually accepted, as a kind of rhythm guide. They may not touch the rope at all. Instead, they stand close enough to observe everyone at once. When the timing drifts, they clear their throat. When the pull comes too early, they shift their weight deliberately, making the imbalance visible. Sometimes they hum softly, setting a pace without words. No one calls them a leader, but everyone listens. This quiet humor does not undermine discipline. It reinforces it. When people feel relaxed, they pay better attention. When tension lifts, mistakes decrease. The work becomes lighter not because the stone weighs less, but because the shared experience distributes effort evenly. Discipline does not feel heavy when it is shared. It feels like cooperation. As the morning progresses, roles may shift. Someone from the left team trades places with someone monitoring balance. Another person steps away briefly to check the path ahead, ensuring the ground remains suitable. These changes happen without stopping the work entirely. The statue waits during pauses, its weight settling back into stillness as if it understands the need for adjustment. Nothing is lost by waiting. The path itself shapes the day. Gentle slopes encourage longer pulls. Flat stretches invite shorter, more frequent adjustments. When the ground changes texture, moving from packed soil to looser gravel, the teams respond instinctively, tightening their grips and slowing the rhythm. The statue does not resist these changes. It accepts them, responding to the same principles everywhere. Balance first, motion second. As the sun climbs higher, shadows shorten. The work continues without escalation. No one pushes to finish by a certain hour. Progress is measured not by distance covered, but by steadiness maintained. If the statue moves well, the day is successful, regardless of how far it travels. This perspective removes pressure and keeps the atmosphere calm. Midday brings a natural pause. The statue is secured, ropes loosened but not removed. People sit nearby sharing food and water. Conversation flows easily, often drifting away from the task entirely. Someone might comment on how the statue seemed particularly cooperative that morning. Someone else jokes that it clearly prefers the left team's timing after all. Laughter rises briefly, then settles. When work resumes, the rhythm returns quickly. Muscles remember, hands find familiar positions. The statue responds as before. There is no need to re-establish control. The pause has not broken continuity. It has refreshed it. This ability to stop and start without difficulty is another advantage of the walking method. The statue does not need to be reset or repositioned. It simply waits. Throughout the afternoon, the balance group remains vigilant. Fatigue introduces subtle risks. Pulls may grow uneven. Pauses may shorten. When this happens, the group intervenes gently. A hand lifts. A rope is adjusted. The rhythm slows. No one is scolded. Correction is quiet and immediate, preventing small issues from becoming large ones. The Moai itself seems to participate in this process. When handled with patience, it behaves predictably. Its movements feel consistent, almost reassuring. People begin to trust it, just as they trust one another. This trust reduces anxiety and further stabilizes the work. The stone does not feel like an adversary. It feels like a partner that must be listened to carefully. As evening approaches, the day's endpoint becomes clear. The statue reaches a natural resting place, a level stretch of ground, perhaps near a bend in the path. The team secure it upright, checking balance one final time. Ropes are loosened and coiled neatly. The Moai stands quietly, unchanged by the day's effort, yet subtly relocated within the landscape. There is no celebration, no sense of completion. Tomorrow the work will continue. For now the statue rests, and so do the people. They leave it as they found it, upright, stable, waiting. The path behind shows subtle marks of passage, but no scars. The land absorbs the movement without protest. Looking back on the day, what stands out is not the weight of the stone or the difficulty of the task. It is the atmosphere, the calm, the shared understanding, the way humor and discipline coexist without conflict, the way patience turns labor into rhythm. In this sleep version telling, the day of moving stone feels less like engineering and more like choreography. Each person plays a role, not rigidly defined, but responsive to the moment. The statue moves not because it is forced, but because it is guided. And the people in guiding it find themselves moving together with a quiet ease that makes even the heaviest task feel manageable. The Moai prefers consistency. It responds to balance. It advances when timing aligns. And when treated with patience, it cooperates fully, accepting each careful step as part of a long journey that does not need to be rushed. Arrival at the Ahu quiet completion. When a Moai finally arrived at its destination, there was no signal to mark the moment as extraordinary. No shout rose into the air, no sudden shift announced that something important had been completed. The transition from movement to stillness happened gradually, almost imperceptibly, as if the statue itself decided that this was where it would now remain. Large efforts, especially those sustained over long periods of time, rarely end with noise. They end with release. The Ahu waited as it always had, solid, low, and carefully positioned within the living geography of the island. These stone platforms were not placed to dominate the landscape. They followed it. Often near the coast, they aligned with villages, paths, and the daily flow of people moving between land and sea. The Ahu did not announce authority. It accepted responsibility. It was here that the Moai would stand, not as an object of spectacle, but as part of a wider, steady arrangement. Raising the Moai onto the Ahu was not a dramatic act, but it was deliberate. The same calm coordination that guided the statue across the island now guided it upward. Ropes were adjusted, not tightened suddenly. Leverage was applied patiently, allowing gravity to assist rather than resist. Each small movement was checked, then repeated. The statue rose incrementally, its weight transferring slowly from ground to platform, as if learning a new balance rather than being forced into one. There was no urgency. If the angle felt wrong, the movement paused. If the base did not settle correctly, the process reversed slightly, then resumed. The people involved understood that the final placement mattered less for speed than for permanence. A Moai raised too quickly could lean. A Moai placed carelessly would not endure. Correctness once again outweighed completion. As the statue reached its upright position atop the Ahu, the work softened rather than stopped. Ropes were loosened gradually. Knots were untied with the same care used to tie them days or weeks earlier. Tools were set down deliberately, not dropped. Hands released stone one by one, ensuring that balance remained undisturbed. The Moai did not shift. It held its position steady and complete without reaction. People stepped back instinctively, not to admire, but to give space. The statue now occupied its own place within the environment. It no longer belonged to the process. It belonged to the setting. Its orientation mattered. The Moai faced inward, toward the land and the community, rather than outward toward the sea. This choice was not decorative. It reflected a relationship. The statue did not watch for threats beyond the horizon. It acknowledged the life behind it: homes, paths, gardens, and people. Once placed, the Moai did not demand attention. It entered the daily visual rhythm of the area quietly. Children would grow accustomed to its presence without remembering a time before it stood there. Adults would pass beneath its gaze without pausing. It became a reference point, not a focal point. Stability does not require constant recognition. The environment responded without interruption. Sunset light continued its slow movement across the island, stretching shadows from stone to grass. Wind moved through low plants. Birds passed overhead. Waves continued their steady work along the shore. Nothing adjusted its behavior to acknowledge the arrival. The Moai did not alter the rhythm of the world around it. It joined it. This quiet completion was not accidental. It reflected the values embedded in the entire process. From quarry to path, from movement to placement, the work had never been about display. It had been about alignment between people, material, time, and landscape. The final moment respected that alignment by remaining understated. There was no formal ending to the day. Some people lingered nearby, adjusting remaining stones on the ahu or smoothing the ground where ropes had rested. Others began to drift back toward the village, carrying tools, exchanging brief remarks, or falling into companionable silence. The work dissolved back into daily life without distinction. Over time, the ahu and its moai became inseparable from their surroundings. Grass grew differently around the stones. Paths subtly shifted to accommodate their presence. Shadows fell in predictable patterns that marked the passage of seasons. The statue did not change, but the context around it did, weaving it more deeply into the fabric of the place. History in this moment did not announce itself. It settled. The completion of the Moai's journey was not a chapter ending, but a sentence closing softly, allowing the narrative of everyday life to continue uninterrupted. There was no sense of finality, only continuity. In sleep version storytelling, this is where the pace slows even further. Attention rests not on what has been accomplished, but on what has been absorbed. The Moai no longer moves. The people no longer pull. The island breathes as it always has, now with one more element, held gently within its rhythm. What remains is not triumph, but presence. The statue stands. The ahu supports. The land accommodates, time continues. And in that continuation, meaning does not need to be explained. It exists quietly, balanced, and complete, requiring nothing more than to be allowed to remain. Stillness as an achievement. Once a Moai had been placed upon its ahu, the work that defined its existence quietly ended. Movement, which had occupied so much careful attention, dissolved into stillness. The statue no longer required hands, ropes, or voices. Its presence became complete, not through action, but through rest. This transition from effort to quiet was not abrupt. It was absorbed gradually, as if everyone involved understood that stillness itself was the final stage of the work. The Moai did not announce its arrival. It simply remained, allowing the island to accept it in the same way it accepted wind, stone, and tide. Completion here was not an event, but a condition that settled naturally into place. What is most remarkable about the Moai is not their height, weight, or technical challenge, but the emotional tone of their creation. Archaeological evidence suggests no trace of urgency. There are no signs of rushed construction, no scars of chaos, no indication that fear or desperation drove the process. Instead, the work reflects patience extended across years, perhaps generations. Each step appears to have been measured, repeatable, and calm. Cooperation mattered more than strength. Timing mattered more than speed. Rest was not a failure of effort, but an essential part of it. The Moai did not emerge from crisis. They emerged from consistency. Stillness in this context was not passive. It was earned. The statue's final posture represented the accumulation of thousands of small decisions made correctly. Every pause during carving, every adjustment during transport, every moment of waiting during placement contributed to this outcome. When the moai stopped moving, it was because nothing further needed correction. Stillness became proof that balance had been achieved. In this way, the statue's silence carried meaning. It signaled that the work had aligned fully with its environment and could now exist without intervention. Once the moai stood, people returned to smaller tasks without ceremony. Fishing resumed, gardens were tended, tools were repaired or stored. Life flowed back into its familiar channels. There was no separation between monumental work and ordinary labor. One did not overshadow the other. The moai's presence did not demand attention or interrupt routine. It blended into daily life, becoming a quiet reference point rather than a focal distraction. Children grew up with the statue already standing, unable to imagine a time when it was not there. Its stillness allowed continuity to form around it naturally. The island itself continued breathing at its usual pace. Waves did not alter their rhythm. Wind did not change direction. Birds nested where they always had. The moai did not impose itself upon the landscape. Instead, it adapted to the island's existing patterns. Shadows fell predictably across stone and grass. Seasons marked time through light rather than ceremony. In this way, the statue participated in the island's life without dominating it. Stillness allowed harmony. Motion had brought the moai to its place, but rest allowed it to belong. In modern terms, it is tempting to frame achievement as visible action. Progress is often measured by speed, scale, or disruption. The moai challenge that instinct. Their achievement lies in restraint. The absence of visible strain is not evidence of simplicity, but of mastery. To move something massive without leaving marks of struggle requires discipline. To complete a project without spectacle requires confidence. The moai demonstrate that success does not always announce itself. Sometimes it stands quietly, unchanged, while the world moves gently around it. In sleep version storytelling, this moment invites the listener to slow completely. The narrative no longer advances through steps or sequences. It settles. Attention shifts from how something was done to how it feels once nothing more is required. The image becomes stable, stone standing, grass moving, light changing. There is no anticipation, no next task, only presence. This is the rare moment when effort releases its grip and allows rest to take over fully. The phrase "stone stopped walking" carries no drama here. It is descriptive rather than symbolic. Movement had served its purpose. Balance had been achieved. The moai did not need to go anywhere else. Its value now lay in remaining exactly where it was. This idea reframes achievement itself. Instead of reaching forward, achievement here means holding steady. Instead of expansion, it means containment. Instead of noise, it means quiet endurance. Over long periods, this stillness became meaningful in ways that action could not. The moai witnessed generations without comment. It did not change expression as languages shifted or customs evolved. It offered no instruction yet provided continuity. People changed around it, but the statue remained, anchoring memory to place. In this way, stillness preserved identity more effectively than movement ever could. Ultimately, the moai remind us that the conclusion of effort does not diminish its value. On the contrary, it completes it. The final achievement was not transport, carving, or placement alone, but the ability to stop, to trust that enough had been done, to allow the stone to stand without further correction. In that decision, patience reveals itself, not as delay, but as understanding. And stillness, carefully earned, becomes the most enduring accomplishment of all. When sleep learns the same rhythm. In the end, the most unusual part of the Moai story is not their size, their weight, or the distance they traveled across the island. What lingers most gently is the choice people made about how to do the work. Faced with stone that could not be hurried, they did not fight time. They cooperated with it. They allowed effort to move at a pace that matched breath, balance, and patience. Difficulty was not treated as something to conquer loudly, but something to approach quietly, one measured motion at a time. That choice changes how the story feels when it settles. There is no final triumph, no dramatic release of tension. Instead, there is alignment. Stone finds its place. People step back. The island continues without interruption. What remains is a sense that calm itself was part of the technology, as essential as rope, hands, and knowledge passed carefully between generations. As this story slows further, the images soften. You may imagine a Moai no longer as a monument, but as a rhythm, a gentle shift to the left, a gentle shift to the right. The movement exists only in memory now, repeated so slowly, it feels almost like breathing. There is no sound of strain, no urgency, only balance, responding to balance, timing answering timing. The island does not watch, it does not judge. Wind passes as it always has. Grass bends and rises again. Waves continue their quiet work along the shore. Nothing needs to change for the moment to feel complete. The Moai stands because it no longer needs to move. Stillness becomes not an ending, but a form of rest that carries meaning. And in this quiet completion, your own thoughts may begin to follow the same pattern. Not pushing forward, not holding on, just shifting lightly, then settling. Ideas can loosen their grip. Questions can rest without answers. The mind, like stone, does not need to be carried when it finds balance on its own. Sleep, too, arrives this way, not pulled, not forced. It comes when effort steps aside and rhythm remains. A slow sway, a steady pause. The kind of rest that does not demand attention but accepts it gently when it arrives. The path fades without ceremony. The work is done without announcement. The stone rests, the island breathes, and you are free to do the same, following the quiet rhythm that has been here all along until thought grows lighter, motion disappears, and rest settles naturally into place.